What's going on, everybody? How we doing? It was like the least responsive, but I just heard one person go, good, great. Let me ask you guys again, how are you guys doing tonight? You feeling okay tonight? All right, that was much better. I got really panicky there at the beginning. That was rough. Well, hey, we're going to cut straight to the chase tonight. We are diving back in, to our series in Philippians. And you can get out your booklets that we gave you that will accompany us. And we're going to be in chapter 3 of Philippians. We hope you've been reading through Philippians with us. If you have not been and you're like, man, I feel like trash about it, it's okay. You can start this week. We post it on our social media. You can pick up with us and start following along as we read through Philippians. So I want to pose a question to you guys as we get into things tonight. And I want this question to kind of frame the sermon, okay? This is a framing question. Everything can kind of be read through the lens of this question. I want you to write it down. I want you to countenance this. I want you to think about it tonight, okay? Ask yourself the question, what am I living for? A lot of times in life, we get busy doing things. We get busy thinking about things, dreaming about things, that we don't ever actually think about, like, well, what's the ultimate aim? What's the ultimate gain? What is the ultimate goal of our lives? We just kind of keep our eyes down, and then before you know it, you look up and you're 32, and you're like, whoa, what happened? Or some of you seniors are feeling this way, where you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, I graduate in like a month. Where'd the time go? And so I want you to ask yourself that question tonight. What am I living for? And then ask yourself this question too. Write it down if you need to. What is my priority? What do I rank as most important? What's the most important thing to me? So you guys are at an auspicious age. You're at a significant time in your life where you are starting to make decisions now about your future. And we've talked about this several times. The decisions you're making now, the ways you're living now, who you are becoming now is going to turn you into who you will become. Seems like simple logic, but people don't think about this. And the trajectory that you have yourself on, the thing you're aiming for right now, if you stay on this path, hopefully that's where you get. But a lot of times people don't have that aim. They don't have that ultimate goal or that gain, and so we kind of live purposelessly. And so I want you to think about that. I want you to start mulling over these questions. Maybe your ultimate aim in life is to get good grades, to get into a good school, so you can get a good job, so you can get a good family, and a good house, and a good car, and be successful. And that's the thing. And that's your ultimate aim. And, well, it's good to have goals. Like, is that going to bring you ultimate fulfillment, ultimate happiness? Is that the ultimate aim? Is that the greatest gain of your life? And that's kind of what we want to look at tonight. And this is what Paul's going to speak into in Philippians. He's going to kind of question, like, what are we living for? What is our greatest priority? Are we making decisions that actually matter? And are we investing in things that last and have eternal ramifications? And so we're going to look at that tonight. And as we get into Philippians 3, we're going to actually start in verse 4. And I want to give you just a little background, a little preface to what's happening here, because we have to kind of put the text in context. Otherwise, we're not going to know what is going on here. And so we talked last week about Paul actually addressing some external conflicts the church was facing. There was this Roman society that was all about achieving great things, and it was all about rivalry and who can be the greatest, and it was all about getting your personal honor and glory. And Paul's like, nah, bump that. You should be humble. You should stay humble, and you should actually count or rank others as more significant than yourself. Forget about this external culture that we live in that's telling the church at Philippi how to act. He's like, no, I'm pushing against that. No, we live with humility as we follow Jesus. And we talked about that last week. Well, in this week, in chapter 3, Paul turns his attention from addressing the culture of the day to addressing the church and the internal conflicts. And we learn later in the book of Philippians that there's some beef. Some people have some beef in the church. But there's this bigger problem going on that's actually pervasive throughout all of Paul's letters. Now, I want to make this as short and sweet as I can and kind of give you guys the big picture. But I need to teach you a little bit of something about the early church. And this is maybe stuff you haven't learned before. And as I tell you this, you might go, yeah, but what does that say about my life, Matt? Okay, well, first of all, stop the sass. That was a lot of sass just then, okay? First of all, that. Secondly, when we read the Bible, the right thing to do is understand it in their culture, understand it in their day, and then we, in humility, take what we learn and we apply it to our lives. If I just came in here and was like, all right, here's the 7 things about your life you want to do, and I just say, oh, also a couple of verses. It's not how you approach the Bible. It's not approaching it in humility. And so I need to teach you something that's kind of foundational that will help inform your view of what's going on. You won't understand the conflict in the church if you don't understand a couple of things. Okay, so first thing, lightning fast. The early church came out of the Jewish faith. So the whole Old Testament is about the people of Israel. And so it was a very Jewish religion, and Christianity came out of that. It was like the fulfillment of that. It was the moving forward of that. And so, I mean, the first half of your Bible is about the nation of Israel. Jesus was Jewish, born to the nation of Israel. Paul was Jewish, born in the nation of Israel. He was an Israelite. And most of the early converts to Christianity were Jewish. Okay, so cool. They believed that Jesus was the foretold Messiah. When you see the word Christ in the New Testament, it's actually a reference to that. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised king, who would be the Son of God, who would be one and the same with God, who would live a life that none of us could live, and die a death to cover all sin and forgive all sin for all time. And so the early church was very Jewish, and they believed that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Jewish faith and the moving forward of that, which is great, fine, no problems. But then, as the church expanded, and Paul had a lot to do with this, they started bringing in non-Jewish people called Gentiles. Well, this would be awesome because the gospel is getting out, and Jesus is like, no. What God is doing is not just for the Jewish people, it's for all people. Amen and hallelujah. That's great. That's why we're all in this room today. But there's some conflict that starts brewing because the people, the kind of first Christians, the Jewish Christians, wanted to hold to a lot of their old practices that you read about in the Old Testament. Some of the old laws, some of the old ways you're supposed to eat and wash your hands, and some of the holidays you're supposed to observe. And this thing that they used to do, now to us today it's a common thing, but back then it wasn't. They held very strongly to the belief in the principle, and they get this from the book of Leviticus in chapter 12, that all Jewish people should be circumcised. Okay, I know that's a weird word, and all the eighth graders are going to be like, okay, focus, all right? Focus for 5 minutes, okay? We'll be okay. And so, if you don't know what that is, I can't help you, but it's something that they do to boy babies when they're born, usually on the 8th day. And so the Jewish people, now some of you are going, why is he talking about this? Can we just talk about how I shouldn't do drugs or something in high school? Can we just talk about that, please? Okay, again, we have to understand their context, their worlds. So the Jewish people still held that every single Jewish baby should be circumcised on the 8th day they were born. Well, here's the problem. Do I? Yeah, Jewish boys, sorry. Yeah, Jewish boys, sorry. Yes, thank you. That they should be circumcised on the 8th day. Well, here's the problem. Back then, Gentile people were not circumcised. So that means they were grown-ups, and they didn't look the same in that way as Jewish people. So you could be like, well, that's fine. We can just be different. That's totally okay. And the Jewish people believed that this circumcision was the thing that made them special. It marked them as different than everybody else. And don't worry, we'll move on from this conversation for those of you who just can't handle it. But please just hold on, because it's going to kind of come together and make sense. So they were holding to this, and they started, the early Jewish Christians and believers, they kind of held on to some of their old rules and laws, and especially about circumcision. They're like, well, it marks us as special as God's chosen people. So we're going to hold on to that. And you non-Jewish Christians, you guys are going to have to do it too. Now, here's the conflict with that. If I was living back then, I'm 32 years old. Say I wasn't a Jewish person back then and therefore was not circumcised. As a 32-year-old man, I'm not going to show up to church and be like, hey, can I join? And they go, yeah, sure. You have to get circumcised, though. I would probably be like, is there a written exam I can do instead? Is there something else I can do? Can I pay someone off? Is there something I can do instead? You know what I'm saying? This was kind of a turnoff to non-Jewish believers. And this is a huge problem because, think of the population of the world. So I guess the only people that can be Christians is this smaller group of people. Because, again, this was scaring people off, from non-Jewish people off from joining the church. And Paul, he was not about this life. And so, again, to try to put it into the context of today, okay? It'd be like if someone gave an altar call, and they're like, with every head bowed and every eye closed, if you'd like to follow Jesus, raise your hand. And, hands would go up, and you'd be like, okay, now if you'd like to get to the front so we can circumcise you, raise your, come on up. You'd probably be like, what? What was that? I like the first part. What was the other part? What was that? I'm not into that. And so it scared people off, and Paul realized this. And what happened was, these good things that God gave the Jewish people in the Old Testament, they held on to them, which again wasn't inherently evil. There was nothing bad about that. But what they started doing is taking these things and kind of using them as a platform so that they could look down on non-Jewish people. This is a problem. And Paul did not like this. So there wasn't unity, there wasn't harmony. In fact, there was division and there was factions. So here's what Paul's going to do. Because of this, we had to get past that conversation, but do you guys understand what the problem with that is, right? Okay? So if I'm a guy trying to join the church, I'm probably going to be freaked out because if he's like, come down the aisle. Okay, now you're going to get circumcised. I'd be like, run the other way. I'm not into it. And so Paul is going to address this division between the people, address this one group of people looking down on another group of people. And so here's what Paul's going to do as a Jewish guy. He's going to give what I call Paul's resume, all right? And Paul is going to step in, and this is a form of argumentation back then, where Paul is going to argue from authority, from a place of authority. He's going to call out these people who are kind of standing on the rules and traditions. What he's going to do is be like, I see your rules, I see your traditions. Guess what? I'm more than you. I've done all that better than you. And Paul's going to kind of get chesty here because he's being defensive of these people who should be welcomed into the church, but instead are kind of like, they're kind of being looked down upon, judged, and they're kind of being pressured to hold to all these rules, and especially some of these like more serious commitments. And so this is what Paul does. He starts to boast. Chapter 4. Let's throw it up there. So he says, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh, that means in all the things that like make me a Jewish man and all the rules and all the rituals of the Old Testament, I can boast about it. I can boast about it. If anyone else thinks he has reasons for confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day, which you were supposed to do as a Jewish man. I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel. I'm an Israelite, just like you people, just like you guys. Of the tribe of Benjamin, which that was, if you read the Old Testament, the tribe of Benjamin was considered the favored tribe of Israel. So he's like, hey, I was from the favorite tribe of Israel. And then he says, a Hebrew of Hebrews. Now let's just stop right there at that semicolon. All these things Paul has described so far are not things he's done. It's his pedigree. It's his background. It's his ethnic background. So he's talking to this group of people, and he's like, so you guys think because of the fact that you guys were circumcised on the 8th day and that you're Jewish and that you're Israelites, you think you can look down on these people that aren't in the church. That's not okay. Listen, I'm like you, all right? So, like, you should listen to me. And again, Paul's making this argument so that they'll listen to him. And then Paul goes on to show them what he's done. So this first part is kind of like who Paul is. Now he's going to talk about what he's done. And Paul says this. He says, as to the law that they were supposed to keep, he's like, I was a Pharisee, okay? I did it right. If you don't know what a Pharisee is, a Pharisee was someone in these days that held really faithfully, really obediently to the law of the Old Testament and who followed the Lord faithfully. Now, if you grew up in church, you see the word Pharisee and you're like, oh, they're the bad guys. No. Some of them were. Some of them actually followed Jesus. They were just really religiously devout people. So Paul's like, check it. I was the most devout. I was like really respected. People looked to me as an example. It's almost like he was like a pastor or something. And then he says, as to zeal, which means like passion and commitment, he's like, man, I persecuted the church. I persecuted those guys. And as to righteousness under the law, I was blameless. And that essentially means Paul's like, hey, listen, I kept every little rule. I did every little thing I was supposed to. I'm just like you. So therefore, we can talk, okay? Paul, again, this is a form of argumentation back in this day, where Paul has to boast. He kind of has to make himself an authority. This is called an argument by authority, an authority so that he can talk to these people. And what he's doing is, as he's talking, these people, these early Christians, these Jewish Christians are probably going, okay, cool, oh, yeah, okay, oh, okay, yeah, okay, so you're in. Okay, we get it, you're committed. Then Paul's going to flip the script on them, and he's going to change it up. And we see that Paul lays out his resume here, all the great things he's done. Look at that. Check, 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 check. And what Paul's going to do in this next section, essentially, is like light it on fire. And be like, it doesn't matter. And so Paul, we see, comes to what I call the conclusion. And in the conclusion, we see this in verses 7 through 8. And it says, but, what? And so that's a transition word, but. Whatever gain I had, I counted as loss. All the things I did, all the ways in which I was like the most devout Jewish person ever, I count all that as loss for the sake of Christ Jesus. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord. Now, let me unpack a few things for you here. First of all, the word gain here and loss is used a lot. These two words are used a lot. In Greek, these words are kind of like accounting words. They're economic words. Gain is like a profit. It's like if you sold something, you would make a gain. The word for loss here, I think, is very interesting. It's zamia. And this word actually means, it can mean, in this context, a bad investment, okay? It can actually mean like something you lost money on. So like, let me give you an example of a bad investment. This one might surprise you guys. So back when I was in college, they had these things called, this dates me a little bit, but I think this makes a point. They had these things called internet cafes, okay? This is going to blow your mind. And at internet cafes, they would set up like a coffee shop and you could sit down there and you could plug in and use their internet. That's right, you could plug in and use their internet. And this was before you had Wi-Fi everywhere. It was before, God bless it, we all had cell phones and we could have the internet on our phones. And so people spent lots of money investing in internet cafes. And in fact, where I lived and went to college, they had an internet cafe. And someone probably spent a lot of money on that. Well, like 2 years later, the first iPhone dropped, and then Wi-Fi started becoming a thing. And so now people looked at it and they're like, why would I go to an internet cafe? I can use the internet sitting on the toilet at a 7-Eleven on my phone. Like, why do I need to come to your cafe? That's a dumb investment. And so that's a bad investment. That's not a worthwhile thing. It didn't have very much value. And that's kind of the economic word that Paul's using here. Everything Paul thought was gain, was profit. All the things he was doing that he thought made him a good person, a religious person. He's like, I thought that was going to gain, but honestly, that was a bad investment of my time and efforts. That was a poor investment. That did not pay off because I know what's better. And then Paul starts to use these words like counted as loss, and he talks about the surpassing worth of knowing Jesus Christ. And what's really interesting is these words that Paul uses, he uses them very strategically. Paul's a brilliant writer. He's a smart guy. And he actually used these two exact same words in the passage we looked at last week in Philippians 2. And to kind of backtrack, in Philippians 2, Paul says, do nothing out of rivalry, do nothing out of empty glory, but in humility, he says, count others as more significant than yourself. Well, the two words he uses here, he says, count others more significant than yourselves. The word count we talked about 2 weeks ago, we talked about how that actually means rank or prioritize as surpassing or having greater value. Paul essentially says the same thing here, and I've kind of stacked the verses up so you could see this. Last week he said, do nothing from selfish ambition, with rivalry, or conceit, empty glory, but in humility, count or prioritize others more significant than yourself. This week, Paul's using the exact same words there in blue. He's essentially saying, this is kind of a summary of the verse that we just read, have no confidence in the flesh, but rank or consider Jesus as more significant than anything. So Paul's getting back to this whole ranking thing, and he's like, hey, I'm going to use the exact same words. I want you, compared to all the stuff that I did that was a bad investment, that wasn't worthwhile, now I rank Jesus as more important. I rank or count Jesus as having more and significant value. And so Paul's changing the way his value system, he's changing the way he views the world, he's flipping the script, he's changing his mind. And so then Paul gets into the recognition of the most important thing. So let's go back to the verse there. And the whole verse, the whole passage leads up to this moment. And he talks about knowing Jesus Christ. For Paul, this is the central thing. This is the most important thing, is knowing Jesus. Yes, he's got this long resume of things that made him very, and his Jewish religion made him very holy and very righteous. But he's like, you know what? That was a bad investment of my time and efforts. That's actually not as good as knowing Jesus. And for Paul, focusing on this, write it down if you gotta. The most important thing, the priority, the thing he is ranking higher than anything else, is knowing Jesus. And he grew up in this religious system, but he didn't know Jesus. And maybe you have grown up in church, and maybe you have spent years in the church, and maybe you've done all the right things, and you've said all the right things, and you have this resume like Paul where you can just check a list, but maybe you don't actually know Jesus. And maybe that's a word for you tonight. Maybe you need to kind of check yourself and say, do I really know Jesus, or do I kind of know about Jesus, or I've just been in church or been kind of religious my whole life? And so Paul says this is the greatest thing, knowing Jesus. Then Paul, like any good pastor, will go on to repeat what he says in a way that emphasizes his point. And this is where Paul kind of gets in. This is where Paul kind of goes next level. So let's throw the verse back up there. Oh, it's already up there. Hey. So he says, for his sake, for the sake of Jesus, I have suffered the loss of all things, and I count them as rubbish in order that I might gain Christ. So Paul talks about, okay, not only is Jesus my priority, not only is he my ultimate aim and my greatest gain, but I've actually sacrificed everything for Jesus. And you know what? It's worth it. And then, look at this word. He says, for his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and counted them as rubbish. Okay, let's just be real for a second. Who uses the word rubbish anymore? That's right. If you raise your hand, you're a liar. No one uses the word rubbish. You don't be like, hey, how's that new movie? Bro, that was straight rubbish. Like, no one talks like that anymore. You know what I'm saying? Hey, how's your food? How's your food? It's rubbish. Like, no one talks like that. This word's ridiculous. So I want to teach you what this word is in Greek. And quite frankly, it might take you by surprise, okay? So the word for this in Greek is skubalon. All right? Skubalon. Everyone say skubalon. And here is the interpretation in Greek. This is not made up. This is not exaggerated. I'm not fabricating this. If this offends you, I'm sorry. Poop. This is the word that Paul uses. Now, some of you are like, that is so irreverent in church. Well, tell that to Paul because that's the word he used. It means poop. Paul is essentially saying, all the things I did that I thought made me a great person, all the things that turned out to be honestly bad investments of my time, that didn't lead me to Jesus or lead me to knowing Jesus anymore, you know what? It was a load of crap, honestly. It was a load of crap. Now, Paul says this for two reasons. One, to emphasize his point. Two, he's using what's called hyperbole, okay? Maybe you've learned about this in English class. Hyperbole is just an overdramatic statement to make a point. So if someone's hungry, what do they say? They're like, oh, I'm dying. I'm going to die if you eat me. Okay, and you're like, you're not going to die. Just chill out. You had a sandwich like 20 minutes ago, okay? You're fine. Or like, I don't know, if my wife sees something cute, she'll always be like, oh my gosh, I die. I'm like, obviously she's not dying. You know what I'm saying? This is just hyperbole. Or like sometimes if nothing's going right, I'll just like, and I'm working on something, I'll just be like, oh, I hate everything. I don't really hate everything. This is just hyperbole, okay? This is what Paul is doing here. So Paul's not looking back on all the stuff he did, and it's not all inherently bad. Like, Paul being Jewish is not bad. A lot of the festivals that he observed and the holidays and the things he did, they're not inherently bad. They're not inherently evil. But compared to knowing Jesus, he's like, oh, compared to that, it's not even close. I rank that as higher and higher. That's crap as far as I'm concerned. And so, like, we could see that in our lives. We could chase so many things. We can view so many things as important. We could do things that we're like, oh, this makes me a really good person, okay? But really, Paul would be like, no, dude, that's just like, that's poop. Like, it doesn't compare to knowing Jesus. And then Paul transitions, and he ends with this part. I love this. He says, that I may or might gain Christ. The greatest good for Paul is knowing Jesus and following Jesus. And so that's why this is kind of the bottom line I want to operate with tonight. I feel like if Paul was here, he would say this to you. Make following Jesus your ultimate aim and your greatest gain. As you're going through life, as you're in these moments in life, in this stage of life where you're trying to figure out what's next, I would say your ultimate aim and your greatest gain is following, is knowing Jesus. And that's what Paul would tell you if he was up here. And what we see at the end of this is Paul has totally redefined and reprioritized his life. Where he did all this other stuff that he's like, making me a good person. I'm better than all of you people in the church that are being kind of judgmental about this stuff. I was more so than you. And he's like, and guess what? It wasn't as important. Comparatively to knowing Jesus, it's a load of crap, which would have offended people. But Paul did not want this sense. He didn't want this disunity in the church. And he did not want one group of people looking down, turning their nose up at another group of people. Nah, he wanted unity. And he wanted people to start thinking about what they lived for and what they prioritized. So we circle back to our question we started with. And I want you to ask yourself this question. This is the part of the sermon I want you to kind of turn it inward and look inward and consider this. Ask yourself, what am I living for? Think about it. Don't let life pass you by. Don't get so busy you don't think about it. Ask yourself this other question. We talked about it at the beginning. What is my priority? What is the most important thing in my life? What am I looking to the most? What am I striving for the most? And then ask yourself this question. This one can kind of hurt a little bit. Does it matter? Is it an important thing? And then, this is one we often don't think about. Will it last? Well, does it have any kind of impact, a lasting impact, whether here or in eternity? What are the ramifications of it? And so kind of use this filter, ask yourselves these questions, and start to think about this, especially as you're getting ready to come into summer and then you'll have another school year, or you seniors are getting ready to move on to the next phase of your life. What are you living for? And I'm just going to kind of keep it 100 with you guys, okay? In my years of being a pastor, I have found a couple of things that everyone seems to pursue that are not pursuing Jesus, that are not following Jesus, not making Jesus the ultimate aim, the ultimate gain. Here's what I found that people often get caught up in and devote their lives to, okay? There's 3 things I've observed over my years, okay? Write these down. First one, Popularity, fame, and like well-standing, reputation, if you will. People chase this all the time. Like a dog chasing its tail, people are about this. Here's the problem with popularity. It's fleeting. It's passing. It will not last forever. We talked about this last week. I've never had a job interview where the guy was like, hey, hold on. How popular were you in high school? Like, no one cares. The day you graduate high school, popularity is not a thing anymore. And so popularity is fleeting. And even a lot of the musicians today that were like, oh, they're the best, they're not going to be popular for much longer. Some of the athletes we even know, we're like, oh my gosh, that guy is the best. Well, in a couple of years, especially like a couple thousand years, maybe no one will remember that person. I got a great illustration for you too with music. I know a lot of you guys are like super into music. So does anyone know who this guy is? Whoa, some of you do. Okay, history lesson. I put this one and I use this example because my first tape, not CD, not first thing I downloaded, we didn't have all that. My first tape that I purchased, was MC Hammer. It was one of my early ones. And he had a song called Don't Touch Us, a classic. And he was popular for a hot minute. Look at that phone. Oh my gosh, it's the size of his head. But for MC Hammer, and also he's wearing a skirt, which is distracting. Okay. He was super popular when I was a little kid. Not very popular now. And it's only been like maybe 15, 20 years, 25 years, I don't know. Another 100 years, another 200 years, it won't matter, okay? Right now, everyone's like, LeBron, greatest player, which I would push back on, but still like, LeBron, greatest player. Well, guess what? In 1,000 years, people probably won't remember LeBron James. Back in the Roman days, there was these like mighty gladiators and athletes. Who has their baseball card? You know what I'm saying? Like, no one knows about these guys today. Like, no one cares. Even throughout history, there's been many great rulers and kings. Most of them, you don't know. If I was like, hey, do you know the succession of emperors in the Assyrian Empire? What? No. Yeah, exactly. Popularity, fame, status, that stuff doesn't last. Guess what has lasted? The name and fame of Jesus. That is more lasting. So people chase popularity and fame, and it makes me sad because even a lot of celebrities, like I'll read blogs about this and I'll read interviews, and like once you get to the top, celebrities struggle with all kinds of anxiety, all kinds of depression, because they're like, I'm at the top, and there's nowhere else to go, and I don't know what to do, and now I have to fight to stay at the top, and I have to fight to stay relevant, and it's exhausting. So I feel like, man, when I see people trying to chase popularity or fame or status, I'm like, man, that is exhausting. You're not going to get what you want. That's not going to fill you. That's not going to be satisfying. Paul would say to you that you don't need to make that your ultimate aim or your greatest gain. That's actually going to be rubbish. Okay, that's going to be poop, like compared to knowing Jesus, okay? Count that as loss. That's a bad investment. That's a loss. Okay, so second thing I see people pursue is money, 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 money. Money. People love money. And people spend their whole lives pursuing money. And hey, maybe your money can buy you some happiness, but not lasting happiness. Because here's where I go to with that. I've seen so many times, people, they acquire this wealth. They got the job they wanted. They got the stuff they wanted. They got the status they wanted. They got all this money. And then they'll get like midlife, maybe they're like in their 40s, and all of a sudden they lose their job. And it's like, oh my gosh, now I don't know what my identity is. I don't know what my worth is. I don't know what my value is. I don't know what's the most important thing in my life, my career. It's gone. What do I do? And people are just reeling from this. Similarly, I've seen and I've had friends who are a bit older in life, maybe like, older career-wise. They're like upper 50s, maybe early 60s, and they do a career change, or maybe they lose one job and they're looking for another one, and they have a hard time because at their age, it's hard to find employment. And I've talked to people who are like, yeah, it's like my whole world is just shattered. I have like zero self-esteem. I don't even know what I'm doing. I have no purpose anymore. Well, it's because their whole life was about acquiring money. And when that's gone, now what? That's not a good investment. Paul would say, hey, no, dude, that's a loss. That's a bad investment. You're not prioritizing correctly. Honestly, that's a load of poop in the end. I've also seen with money that when people get it, they have this weird tendency to spend more, okay? Like, they'll be like, I make, like $20 million a year. And like, but I'm going to spend $18 million a year. And then they maintain a narrow margin. Where like, I'm not rolling in money, but like, there's some super rich people that I'm like, we probably have about the same margin of money. And growing up, this was a thing in the like late 90s NBA. NBA players left and right were like declaring bankruptcy once they retired because they like spent all their wealth and spent all their money. They did documentaries on this. And so that's part of the problem in the illusion of wealth too. If you chase that your whole life, sometimes people are like, more will make me happy, more will make me happy. And then, well, yeah, you're kind of putting yourself in an unfortunate situation. Paul would say, bad investment. Paul would say, all that's rubbish, that's poop, that's a load of crap. It's not going to get you where you want. Lastly, I've helped people move into nursing homes before. And guess what they weren't bringing with them? Big bags of cash. You know what I'm saying? Like, moving in, big bags of cash. Grandma swinging wide with their bags of cash. No. Never seen it. Not even seen a lot of furniture. You can't take that with you. That is not going to last. That's not going to have eternal ramifications, and it's not going to be a blessing to anyone else. That's not, Paul would say, bad investment. Last thing. So we talked about popularity, fame, status, money. Lastly, people will chase pleasure and happiness. Okay? Now, that sounds great. Who doesn't want pleasure and happiness? If I was like, who wants pleasure and happiness? Everyone's going to raise their hand. I do, right? The thing is, that's just a dangerous game. I tell people this all the time. People will say things to me like, I just want to do what makes me happy. And I'm like, well, good luck, because that's going to be changing. That's sifting sand. Like, I don't know, I would not put your heels in on that. I feel like, again, you're going to be kind of like chasing your tail with that. And the thing with pleasure is people oftentimes make short-term decisions, short-sighted decisions that have long-term consequences, okay? Short-term, short-sighted decisions with long-term consequences. People do this with food that they eat, and it has consequences on their health. They do this, like sometimes people will do this with like drugs and substances, or like, well, it makes me feel good in the short term, but then it has long-term effects. People do this with their sex life. You know, short-term, short-sighted, but it has long-term consequences. And so that's the problem with pursuing pleasure a lot of times is, and down the road, that can get you in trouble. And it's not going to satisfy you. And actually, science can attest to this. There's certain neuroreceptors in your brain that fire, that communicate to your brain, this feels good, or this is bringing me pleasure, this is making me happy. What they found, especially with people who struggle with addiction of any kind or dependence of any kind, once you keep feeding that, it's almost like your nerves get fried. And you have to like keep upping the high and upping the dosage. So in your life, if you're chasing pleasure, if you're chasing just fleeting happiness, you're going to get to a point where nothing is enough. And you're going to be empty. You're not going to be satisfied. And so that's the problem with pleasure. And in fact, there's this book of the Bible called Ecclesiastes. And this guy named Song of Solomon wrote it. Or Song of Solomon, the guy was named Solomon. His name was not Song of Solomon. Solomon. Solomon wrote it. Solomon was a great king, super rich. He looked back on his life. He was famous. He had money. He openly says in this book called Ecclesiastes, he goes, man, I chased money. I chased women. I chased stuff that I wanted. I chased every pleasure. I didn't deny myself anything. And guess what happened? It was meaningless. It was totally meaningless. And it nothing. It was like chasing the wind. And so I would warn you guys, as we're talking about how we prioritize, how we should make Jesus our ultimate aim and our greatest gain, don't chase these other things in your life because they're not going to get you what you want. You're going to be left feeling empty. And that's not what God created you for. One of my favorite actors / comedians is this guy named Jim Carrey. Show of hands. Who's heard of Jim Carrey? You guys heard of Jim Carrey? Right? Okay. Whoa, well, we have some fans in the room. Okay. All right. Jim Carrey has this brilliant quote that I came across. It reads like this. Jim Carrey said this, I think everybody should get rich and should get famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer. That's someone who's been at the top. He's like, that's not the answer. Paul would agree and say, yeah, you're right, Jim Carrey. That was a bad investment. That was a loss. And all the fame and all the money, nope, that's a load of crap compared to knowing Jesus. Similarly, there's this guy who has this travel show that my wife and I like a lot. His name is Anthony Bourdain. Has anyone heard of him? Anyone ever watched the show? Travels around the world, love it, okay? This dude had these shows that, again, my wife and I love. He travels the world. He eats all the good food. He's super famous. He eats all this good food, talks to all these interesting people. People love him. He's had lots of relationships, like the ladies love him. He's all over the place, and he had this fame and this status, and man, every time my wife and I watch the show, we're just like, man, that guy's got the life. Well, last year, Anthony Bourdain took his own life. And if you watched him on TV, you'd be like, what? What? Huh? How? Why? It's because if you chase fame and popularity, if you chase money, and if you chase pleasure and what you think will make you happy, it ultimately will not. And that's what Paul recognized. He would say, no, bad investment. Bad investment. All that stuff does not add up. Count it as loss. Count it as rubbish. Count it as poop compared to knowing Jesus. Because knowing Jesus is the ultimate aim and the greatest gain. So, this is what I want to leave you guys with tonight. This is my encouragement for you. And this is this bottom line we keep coming back to. Write it down. Memorize it if you gotta. Make following Jesus your ultimate aim and your greatest gain. That will bring you more joy, more contentment, and more peace, and that will have a more long-lasting effect than anything else. Don't get caught up in religious piety like the church of Philippi did, to where they were looking down on other people. No. That's not the point. We're unified as we endeavor to follow Jesus. And so, as I tell you to follow Jesus, I don't want to just leave you with this idea like, follow Jesus, bye. I need to give you kind of some things, like what does that look like? Visualize that for you. As you follow Jesus, the first thing you do is you simply accept the grace and gratitude that Jesus has extended to you. Paul goes on to say in this passage, he says that he has not his own righteousness, not his own goodness. He actually has been credited with Jesus' goodness. The Bible uses this imagery of Jesus covering us with his goodness. So when God looks at us, he doesn't see our insufficiencies, our inadequacies, the ways we fail. No, he sees the goodness of Jesus. So we accept that and we walk in it. And then we extend that same grace to other people. We extend that same grace and we say, hey, if I've been shown grace, how do I not show grace to other people? And that's what drove Paul crazy about the Philippian church. He's like, how are you not going to show grace when you've been shown grace? How are you going to look down on these people because they're different than you when you've been shown grace? So we show other people grace as we follow Jesus. And then we model the life that Jesus modeled for us. We show people the same kind of compassion and love of Jesus. And then we go and make other Jesus followers. And I can tell you, as someone who's done this for years, this brings you more joy and more contentment and more peace in your life and has a greater ramification, greater significance than anything else should do. So as we end here tonight, may we not find our confidence in our achievements. May we not find our confidence in our resume that we have. May we not find confidence in popularity. May we not find confidence in wealth and the pursuit of money. May we not find confidence in the pleasure or the happiness that we seek. But rather, may we find all of our contentment, all of our identity, all of our security, all of our purpose, all of our priority in Jesus. And may we find that, all of that in Christ alone, not in ourselves or what we do. And may we find our strength. May we find our hope. May we find our help. And may we find our peace in Christ alone. May we find our solace. May we find our peace of mind. And may you find your fulfillment in Christ alone. And as we leave here today, make sure you walk out these doors with a new sense of purpose, that you make Jesus your ultimate aim and your greatest gain. Grace and peace to you, Sublime. We love you guys.